Margaret looked at her sister's note and passed it to her aunt at the breakfast table. There was a moment of quiet. Then Aunt Julie started talking. "I can't say anything, Aunt Julie. I know as much as you do. We only met the parents last spring while traveling. I know so little. I didn't even know their son's name. It's all so." She waved her hand and chuckled a bit. "If that's the case, it's too sudden." "Who knows, Aunt Julie? Who knows? But, Margaret, we can't ignore reality now. It's too sudden." "Who knows? But, Margaret." "I'll go get her other letters," said Margaret. "No, I won't. I'll finish breakfast. Actually, I don't have them. We met the Wilcoxes on a bad trip from Heidelberg to Speyer. Helen and I thought there was a great old church in Speyer. The Archbishop of Speyer was one of the 7 electors, you know. Speyer, Mainz, and Cologne. Those 3 cities once controlled the Rhine Valley and gave it the name Priest Street. I still feel worried about this, Margaret." The train crossed on a bridge of boats, and at first it looked good. But in 5 minutes we saw the whole thing. The church had been ruined, totally ruined, by renovations. Not an inch of the original left. We wasted a whole day and met the Wilcoxes while we were eating in the park. They too had been fooled. They were actually staying in Speyer, and they liked Helen suggesting they join us in Heidelberg. They did come the next day. We all went for some drives. They knew us enough to invite Helen to visit them. Well, I was invited too, but Tibby's sickness stopped me, so last Monday she went alone. That's it. You know as much as I do now. It's a young man from nowhere. She was supposed to come back Saturday, but postponed till Monday, maybe because of, I don't know. She stopped and listened to the sounds of a London morning. Their house was in Wickham Place, fairly quiet, because tall buildings blocked the noise from the main street. It felt like a quiet corner or a river mouth, where the water flowed in from the sea and went silent while the waves outside kept crashing. Though the tall buildings were expensive flats with big entrance halls full of doormen and plants, they served their purpose and brought some peace to the older houses across the street. These tall buildings would also be taken down eventually, and new ones would be built in their place, as more and more people crowded onto the precious land of London. Mrs. Munt had her own way of understanding her nieces. She thought Margaret was a bit nervous and was trying to delay by talking a lot. Being diplomatic, she complained about Speyer's fate and said she would never, ever visit it, adding that the Germans didn't understand restoration properly. Germans, she said, are too thorough. Sometimes it's good, but other times not. Exactly, said Margaret. Germans are too thorough. Her eyes sparkled. Of course, I see you Schlegels as English, said Mrs. Munt quickly. English through and through. Margaret leaned closer and patted her hand. Oh yes, Aunt Julie, I am thinking about Helen's letter. I know, I should go and see her. I am thinking about her. I plan to go. But go with a plan, said Mrs. Munt, a bit annoyed. Margaret, if I may suggest, don't be caught off guard. What do you think of the Wilcoxes? Are they like us? Are they good people? Could they understand Helen, who is a very special person in my opinion? Do they care about books and art? That's very important. Books and art. Very important. How old is the son? She says younger son. Is he ready for marriage? Will he make Helen happy? Did you find out? I found out nothing. They both started talking at once. In that case, I can't make any plans, you see. On the contrary, I hate plans. I hate having to decide. Helen isn't a child. In that case, my dear, why go? Margaret stayed quiet. If her aunt couldn't understand why she had to go, she wouldn't explain. She wouldn't say, I love my sister. I need to be with her during this hard time. Love is quieter than strong feelings, and it shows itself more subtly. If Margaret ever fell in love with someone, like Helen, she would shout it out. But since she loved only her sister, she used silent sympathy. I see you as unique girls, Mrs. Munt continued, very special and in many ways wiser than your age suggests. But don't be upset. Honestly, I don't think you're ready for this. It needs someone older. I have no reason to rush back to Swanage. She opened her arms wide. I'm here for you. Let me go to this house, whose name slips my mind instead of you. Aunt Julie. Margaret stood and kissed her. I have to go to Howard's End myself. You don't quite understand, though I can't thank you enough for offering. I do understand, Mrs. Munt replied confidently. I won't interfere. I just want to find out things. That's important. Now, I'll be blunt. You might say the wrong thing. I'm sure you would. You might accidentally offend the Wilcoxes with one of your spontaneous questions. Not that offending them would bother you. I won't ask any questions. Helen wrote to me saying she and a man are in love. There's nothing more to ask as long as she sticks to that. Everything else doesn't matter. A long engagement if needed, but inquiries, questions, plans, no, Aunt Julie, no. Off she went. Not stunningly beautiful or incredibly clever, but bursting with energy and always genuine in her reactions to life's challenges. If Helen had said the same to me about a shop assistant or a poor clerk, Dear Margaret, come into the library and close the door. Your helpful maids are dusting the banisters. Or if she wanted to marry the man who delivers packages, I'd say the same. Then, with a twist that convinced her aunt she wasn't crazy and others that she wasn't just talking, she added, although with the package man, I'd prefer a very long engagement indeed, I must admit. Quite right, said Mrs. Munt, though I don't quite follow you. Imagine if you said something like that to the Wilcoxes. I get it, but most people would think you're nuts. It'd be confusing for Helen. What's needed is someone who'll take things slowly, see where they're headed. Margaret disagreed, but you suggested just now the engagement should end. I think it probably should, but slowly. Can you end an engagement slowly? Her eyes lit up. What do you think an engagement is made of? I think it's made of strong stuff that might bend but won't break. It's different from other connections in life. They can stretch or bend. They're flexible. Engagements are different. Exactly. But why not let me go to Howard's End and spare you all the trouble? I won't interfere, but I do understand what you Schlegels want, so a quick visit will be enough for me. Margaret thanked her again, kissed her again, then hurried upstairs to see her brother. He wasn't feeling well. The hay fever had bothered him all night. His head hurt, his eyes were watery, and he complained about his nose. The only thing keeping him going was the thought of Walter Savage Landor, from whose imaginary conversations Margaret had promised to read to him often during the day. It was tricky. Something needed to be done about Helen. She needed to be reassured that falling in love at first sight wasn't a crime. A telegram would be cold, and a personal visit seemed more impossible by the minute. Then the doctor arrived and said Tibby was really sick. Maybe it would be best to accept Aunt Julie's offer and send her to Howard's End with a note? Margaret was impulsive, changing her mind quickly. She dashed downstairs to the library and said, "Yes, I've changed my mind. I want you to go." There was a train leaving from King's Cross at 11. At 10:30, Tibby, unusually considerate, fell asleep, so Margaret could drive her aunt to the station. "Remember, Aunt Julie, don't get into discussing the engagement. Give my letter to Helen and say whatever you feel, but avoid talking to the relatives. We barely know their names, and besides, it's rude and wrong." "Rude?" Mrs. Munt asked, worried she missed something clever. "I used a fancy word. I just meant, please only talk about it with Helen." Only with Helen. But it wasn't the time to explain love's personal side. Even Margaret didn't want to delve into it, so she contented herself with holding her aunt's hand and thinking, partly sensibly and partly poetically, about the journey starting from King's Cross. Like many who have spent a long time in a big city, Margaret had strong feelings about the different train stations. They are doors to new and exciting things. Through them, we venture into adventures and sunny days, but sadly, we always return to them. In Paddington, all of Cornwall waits, and the far west. Liverpool Street leads to flatlands and endless lakes. Scotland is reached through Euston's Arches, and behind the bustling chaos of Waterloo lies Wessex. Italians understand this well. Those who work as waiters in Berlin call the Anhalt-Bahnhof the Stazione d'Italia because it's how they return home. Even a cold-hearted Londoner gives their stations some personality, feeling both fear and love towards them, even if quietly. To Margaret, please don't judge her harshly. The King's Cross station always felt like infinity. Its position, slightly hidden behind the grandeur of St. Pancras, hinted at a deeper meaning to life. Those two large arches, bland and uncaring, holding up an unattractive clock, seemed like the entrance to an eternal journey. If you find this strange, remember that Margaret isn't the one telling you this. And let me assure you, they were on time for the train. Mrs. Munt, though she bought a second-class ticket, was upgraded to first class by the conductor. There were only 2 second-class compartments, one for smoking and one for babies. You can't expect people to travel with babies, and when Margaret returned home to Wickham Place, she found a telegram waiting for her. "It's over. I wish I hadn't written anything. Don't tell anyone, Helen." But Aunt Julie had left. She was gone for good, and nothing could stop her now.